I didn't actually talk about the fact that Leo Santa Cruz offered Carl Frampton a third fight, a rubber match, in his post-fight interview following his revenge victory over Carl Frampton on Saturday. I didn't actually see that particular interview before I made my post-fight video. So I'm going to touch on what he said here and now, and also the potential next fights for both Santa Cruz and Carl Frampton. As far as what Santa Cruz said, fighting Frampton again in the third fight, I do think he's serious. I do think he means it. At the end of the day, Carl Frampton brings a lot to the table in terms of finances. Leo Santa Cruz wants to get paid. He understands the first two fights, I'm sure, paid very well. He'd like to get another payday like that. His confidence is high at the moment. He thinks he has the beating of Carl Frampton. I'm not sure that his advisors and people around him will want him to go straight away into a third fight with Frampton. 3 fights back to back with the same guy. I'm not sure. It might happen. I'm not completely dismissing it, but I'm not sure. Perhaps they'll want him to take maybe a few other fights, maybe a couple of voluntary defenses, and then maybe go back and fight Frampton again. And apparently Santa Cruz had said that he'd be willing to go to Ireland to fight Carl Frampton, because Frampton had fought him in Vegas now, obviously. So apparently Santa Cruz had said this. I wonder whether he will stick to that particular statement and that particular offer. I'm not sure. Again, the fighter in Santa Cruz might want to be honorable and go ahead and do that. But the money men around him, his promoter, his manager, his advisor, so on and so forth, they may be advising him against that. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about Santa Cruz and what money he may lose, what revenue he may lose out on if he loses his title again, but it's also about them. They're thinking about themselves. Santa Cruz is more of a cash cow to them if he holds on to his belt. And fighting Carl Frampton in Ireland, they might be a bit leery about that. They might think, you know what, no, we don't like it. Yeah, okay, fight Frampton again, we'll do it in the States again. You're the champion, you call the shots. He don't have any rematch clause or anything like that in the contract. We can just sail off into the sunset right now. So if we're going to give Frampton a third fight, let's do it on our terms. Let's not go to Ireland. So those are some things to consider. If both of these fighters go their separate ways for now, Santa Cruz could try and unify with one of the other champions at featherweight. You've got Gary Russell Jr., who's the WBC champion. You've got Lee Selby, the IBF champion, and you've got Oscar Valdez, the WBO champion currently. I think that Selby and Gary Russell Jr. are 2 difficult fights for Santa Cruz. I haven't seen enough of Oscar Valdez to really be able to judge how I think Santa Cruz would do against him. But certainly Gary Russell Jr. and Lee Selby, difficult fights. Lee Selby is slick. He's, got good technique. He's fast, good balance, so on and so forth. We know what Lee Selby's about. He's a good boxer. That to me is a difficult fight for Santa Cruz. Not necessarily unwinnable. No, not at all. Far from it. It's a winnable fight, but a difficult fight. Maybe even more difficult than the Frampton rematch was for Santa Cruz. Then you've got Gary Russell Jr., who I rate in terms of his talent, but he's got terrible hand trouble, and he is flat-footed and slow-footed actually, which is the strange thing about Gary Russell Jr., because he probably has the fastest hands in boxing, but his feet are almost the polar opposite. He's got very slow feet for some reason. Strange. Nonetheless, he's a very dangerous fighter, and I think to beat him, Santa Cruz would have to box a similar type of strategy to the way he boxed against Carl Frampton. Gary Russell Jr. is a short guy. Santa Cruz would not need to get involved, because if he did get involved with Gary Russell, I'm telling you now, Gary Russell's going to get the better of it on the inside. Even though Santa Cruz is known as an inside fighter, known as a pressure fighter, known as a volume guy, Gary Russell is so fast up close, so accurate, and so hurtful. I would not advise Santa Cruz to get involved up close with Gary Russell Jr. I think very few people are going to be able to hang with Gary Russell Jr. up close. Unless you've got serious one-punch KO power where you can hurt him with every shot or whatever, which I don't think Santa Cruz has. He's a decent puncher, but he's nothing crazy. Then I would advise anybody against engaging Gary Russell on the inside. His hands are just way too fast. His combinations are crazy. Do what Lomachenko did to him. I know it's easier said than done, because Lomachenko is an incredible talent. But try and replicate what Lomachenko did. Use your height and reach. Stay away from him. Keep moving, because he's got slow feet. So Santa Cruz, I think, would have to try and do something like that. His advisors, his manager, his promoter, so on and so forth, may prefer him to go down that route. They may prefer the Oscar Valdez fight. That's an all-Mexican affair. A unification, WBA, WBO. They may want to build up Santa Cruz's star more among the Mexican fans. He's already got a good fan base in Mexico, but they can increase it more by putting him against other Mexican champions, other Mexican stars. He fought Abner Mares, obviously, another Mexican. That did well. So they could go down that route. They could fight Gary Russell. They could fight Lee Selby. I'm not sure what they're going to do. In the meantime, they probably won't even try and unify. I would imagine they're going to fight a voluntary and then look about maybe unifying or fighting that third fight with Carl Frampton. As far as Frampton, well, he can go out there and try and get a title shot against one of these guys. If he don't get the Leo Santa Cruz fight straight away, he might try and bide his time and wait. Maybe he will try and get some type of guarantee from Santa Cruz that, okay, I'm going to have this number of voluntary defenses, then I'll fight you, Carl Frampton. Or maybe he won't get that kind of guarantee. Maybe he could be left in limbo and he'll have to go a different route and fight somebody else. Carl Frampton versus Gary Russell Jr., I think that's a good fight. A very difficult fight for Carl Frampton, a very dangerous fight. I would actually lean towards Gary Russell in that fight, although, you know, Gary Russell's a good fighter, but because of his slow feet and because of his brittle hands, you have to give Frampton a pretty good chance in that fight, I think. I saw one particular fight of Gary Russell's where he only used one hand the whole fight because he broke his hand. And his hands are so brittle, it's unbelievable. What the hell? I just lost my mouse. Excuse me there. Yeah, his hands are so brittle, it's unbelievable. This is a guy who is a featherweight. And I've seen him training in like 20-ounce gloves on the pads. You know, incredible. Because his hands are so unbelievably brittle. So that's one of the concerns that I have about Gary Russell. If he didn't have such severe hand trouble, I'd definitely strongly pick him over Carl Frampton. But with the hand trouble combined with the slow feet, you got to give Frampton a decent chance. Frampton against Lee Selby, that might be the route that Frampton chooses to go. Although Lee Selby, having seen what Leo Santa Cruz was able to do boxing at long range against Carl Frampton, I mean, that comes naturally to Lee Selby anyway, that type of style. But it will embolden him, I think, against Carl Frampton. It will give him even more confidence that he can beat Frampton, having seen what Leo Santa Cruz did, because Lee Selby is much more of a natural boxer and a natural counterpuncher than Leo Santa Cruz. Leo Santa Cruz looked weird on the back foot. He looked herky-jerky. He looked robotic and just odd boxing that way. He was effective, but definitely not the best technical boxing display you've ever seen. Lee Selby looks far smoother on the back foot, far more natural. So he'd be confident going into that potential Carl Frampton fight. Would the McGuigans and Frampton be particularly confident taking on that type of style, given what has just happened to them in the Santa Cruz rematch? I'm not sure. And just as a little side note here, I'd said before that to me, all this talk of Carl Frampton being on the pound for pound list and whatnot was silly. And he just got outboxed by Leo Santa Cruz, a guy who's not even a particularly good boxer. He don't have particularly good boxing skills. He's more of a pressure fighter. That's his natural style. And he got outboxed by a guy like that, who, as I've said, his boxing skills are nowhere near as good as Barrera's. When Barrera beat Prince Nassim, he was much sharper, better technique, hand speed. I think he was hitting harder than Santa Cruz as well, in my view. So Frampton being outboxed by a guy like this, just imagine what would have happened had he fought Guillermo Rigondeaux, a guy who is naturally a back foot counter puncher, you know, long arms, good at making it awkward, making you miss and making you pay. Imagine if Frampton had actually fought him. I think, personally, Rigondeaux would have embarrassed Carl Frampton. He would have boxed his head off, totally embarrassed him, had they fought. Particularly when you look at, I know the physical attributes of Santa Cruz are not with Rigondeaux. Rigondeaux's nowhere near as tall as Santa Cruz, so on and so forth. But he's a more natural boxer. He's better on the back foot. He's much faster. Probably hits harder, to be honest with you. I know Rigondeaux is not really somebody that people think about in terms of being a devastating puncher, but I think he's one of those kind of guys who, because he's conservative in terms of the number of punches that he throws, that's why he don't tend to get that many knockouts. But I think if you asked Nonito Donaire, does Rigondeaux hit hard? He'll be like, you know what, the guy hits hard. I think if you ask Jazza Dickens, does he hit hard? He'll tell you he hits hard. And there have been, you know, many other people that Guillermo Rigondeaux's fought. So yeah, I personally think Guillermo Rigondeaux would embarrass Carl Frampton if he'd fought him. I mean, you never know, a couple years down the line, Guillermo Rigondeaux ain't getting no younger. Carl Frampton is a lot younger than Rigondeaux. Maybe they'll fight and Frampton will win. But certainly if you're talking about prime for prime, man, I think Rigondeaux would have embarrassed him. And I think all this pound for pound talk with Frampton was just silly. I said that before the fight. I have to reiterate again now. You know, let Frampton beat the other champions, come back and have a rematch with Santa Cruz. Then we'll start talking about Frampton being pound for pound. Yeah. And win the rematch as well. We're in the third fight. Until then, like, let's be realistic here. So anyway, I'm not sure if he would go for a Selby fight stylistically, given what happened in the Santa Cruz rematch. Maybe he would try to go for Oscar Valdez. Carl Frampton. Maybe he'd try and get Valdez to Ireland or the UK. Maybe he would prefer the Gary Russell fight. Gary Russell probably don't have that many fans. Maybe Gary Russell would travel. Maybe Gary Russell would be emboldened to go and fight Carl Frampton in Ireland. Maybe that would play into Frampton and the McGuigan's hands. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where both fighters go from here. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, people. It's happening. I'm out.